In this segment, Chef Peterson will prepare a basic pie dough. Yield 5 pounds 2 ounces dough, approximately 6 shells. Ingredients include 3 pounds pastry flour, 4 teaspoons salt, 2 ounces granulated sugar, 1 pound 8 ounces all-purpose shortening, 3 fluid ounces cold water.
Basic pie dough is one of the easier things to make in the bake shop. We have here the ingredients for basic pie dough. I have all-purpose flour. I have a all-purpose shortening. We have the salt, and we have sugar, and we have cold water. It's very important to use cold water for this application in order for the shortening not to blend too quickly with the flour. If it blends too quickly with the flour, we're not going to have a flaky pie crust. The first step that we're going to do, though, we're going to have to sift our flour together with our salt and sugar. Oops. So we're going to go ahead and add our salt and our sugar to our flour. And we're going to mix it up together a little bit first. Then we're going to add it to the colander here. For this application, I like also to, if possible, to use cold flour. So I place my flour and my shortening in the refrigerator, as well as make sure that I have cold water in order for this pie dough to come together well. This gives me the opportunity to make a much flakier crust, and the flakier crust is what we need for our, especially for the top of the pie. We make 2 kinds of pie dough with this recipe right here. We made both a flaky and a mealy crust. The 2 differences between the doughs is the amount of time that we mix it, and I'll explain that as I go along. Now that I have my flour sifted, I'm going to go ahead and put in my shortening. And what we're going to do, we're just going to what we call cutting the shortening. And as you see, I'm wearing gloves because I prefer to do this by hand. And I like to wear a pair of gloves that are about a size too small. This way I have more feel of the dough as I put it together. Some people prefer to use a fork. I prefer to use my hand. I have more feeling this way of the dough. So as you can see, I just knead it through my fingers, and once in a while I just fold in the flour like this. What we're looking for to get a flaky pie dough, we're going to look for some corn size or for some pea-sized pieces of shortening throughout our dough. When we get to that point, we're going to go ahead and add our water. If I wanted to make a mealy pie dough, we're going to mix it a little bit longer and have some corn size pieces of shortening in there. When you go for the mealy pie dough, the water going into the dough is usually a little bit less. Today I'm going to try to make a flaky pie dough. At this point here, as you can see, I have pieces of shortening all through my flour. It's pretty evenly distributed, and at this point I'm going to go ahead and add the water. Again, when I add the water, I like to use cold water. Cold water keeps the shortening cold so it does not blend with the flour too much, and if the flour blends with the shortening too much, you're not going to have a flaky dough when you come out with your pie. Any flour that you get when you work with it, sometimes some flour absorb more water than others, so it's very important that you just monitor what you're doing and make sure you don't add too much water at the time, but at the same time, sometimes the recipe that you have in the book will take a little bit less or a little bit more flour than you anticipate. So it's important not to just pour it all in at once. You got to kind of feel your way through before you're done. At this point here, I can feel that my dough is almost there. I don't want to overmix it. If I overmix it, I'm not going to have a nice flaky crust. What we're looking for here, we're looking for layers of shortening within the dough to create flakiness. If I overmix it, the flakiness will disappear completely. Again, as you can see, it's almost just pieces of dough layered together here. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make sure that all the flour is incorporated, and then I'm going to stop mixing. Now, in order for us to be able to use this dough, it's important that it rests, because we have activated the gluten, and the gluten is going to make the dough a little bit elastic. So it's very important that we let it rest for at least about an hour in the refrigerator before we use the dough. Here we have our dough. I'm going to put it on a piece of film wrap here, so we can wrap it up and put it in the refrigerator. Your dough should have little pieces of shortening throughout the dough. That is what creates the flakiness. Now again, the reason for refrigerating the dough is, first of all, to let the dough rest so that the gluten can relax and we can work with it properly. And also, we want to make sure that it's a little bit easier to work with. When the dough is a little bit cooler, it's easier to roll out and comes out much easier and cleaner. Okay? So here we have our flaky pie dough. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator, and we'll come back and we'll show you how to roll it out. So now our dough has rested for an hour, and I've also portioned out a few pieces so I can roll out a couple of pieces for you to show how to do that. As you can see in the pie dough, you see little specks of shortening. That's going to create our flaky crust. Now in order to roll it out, I'm going to use a little bit of dusting flour on the bench, and it's important that when you roll it out, you roll from the middle out toward the end. Otherwise, you will not have an even pie crust. So you start with your rolling pin from the middle and keep rolling. It's also important to rotate the pie dough around a little bit. That's going to ensure that you have a round pie dough. Also, that it does not stick to the bench as you roll it out. You want to make sure you keep having flour underneath and on top of the pie dough so it does not stick to the rolling pin. What you're looking for, you're looking for a piece of dough that will reach over the pie shell and exceed the pie shell about ½ an inch. The reason for that is that there is always a little bit of shrinkage after you roll the pie dough up, so you want to make sure you have plenty of pie dough at the edge of the pie shell in order for the top of the pie shell to stick to when you put the double crusted pie on, or as we're going to do later on, do the lattice work. So I take a measurement and see that I have plenty of pie dough right now. I'm going to go ahead and line this pie shell with my pie dough like this. I'm going to fold it over in quarters, and I'm going to use a little brush here to get the excess flour off. You don't want too much flour into the pie crust. It's not very attractive and does not taste that well. This point here, I'm just going to put it to the middle like this. And now we have our pie dough covering up. We have enough pie dough exceeding the pie shell so that we have plenty of room here on the pie crust for us to attach the top of the pie for the double crusted pie, as well as for the lattice work we're going to do on one of the pies. Okay? In order for me to have an even, I use the little pie shell like this and give it a little bit of a push down like this, so I have a nice even pie shell to work with. Okay? So here is my pie shells ready to be filled. As a rule, when you roll out a pie shell, it should be about1/4 inch thick in order to have enough crust that when you can serve it without any problems. I have now rolled out a total of 4 pie shells here. And at this point here, I'm going to go ahead and fill them up with pie filling. What we have to fill them up with today, we have a nice cherry pie filling right here. And we're going to fill up 3 pie shells. We're going to make a double crusted pie. We're going to make a lattice work pie. We're going to make a crumb crust pie. So we're going to go ahead and fill them up. You don't want to overfill the pie. If you overfill the pie, as the pie bakes, it will expand, the filling will expand and it will boil out. So it's important not to overfill the pie. Also try not to get any pie filling on the edge of the pie crust, which will create an area that's going to be hard to seal when you put the pie crust on top. Okay? So here we have our filled pies. Okay, and what I'm going to start with, go ahead and make the crumb crust. Here we have a crumble, a streusel, so to speak. And what we're going to do, we're going to just fill the pie up with that. I'm going to go ahead and start with this pie right here. And in order to have a nice clean edge, I like to use a plastic scraper to get the excess pie dough off here to get a nice clean edge. If you use a knife or if you use a spatula, a lot of time it will catch on the aluminum foil and kind of create a little bit of an uneven edge. But as you see here, now I have a nice edge, okay? I'm going to take the crumbs that I have in the bowl here, and I'm going to take it in my hand. I'm going to kind of squeeze it together like this, and then I'm going to break it up in little clumps. And what that's going to create is when we're doing the baking, it's going to kind of bake like small pieces of candy, and it's going to give us a really nice mouthfeel and also a nice look on the pies. It's very important that you cover the filling up completely. This way, the sugar within the crumb crust will seal, and so none of the pie filling will bake out. Here you have a nice crust, and that's your crumb crust. Okay, clean up the mess a little bit. Now, for our double-crusted pie, it's very important that you give it a little bit of an egg wash in order for it to seal properly. You don't want to overdo it because then it will slide around on you when you work with it. However, you do want to make sure that you do brush the edge of the pie enough to that it seals the pie when you put the pie crust on there. I have some pie crust that are already rolled out right here. I'd like to show you how to prepare the double crust. You want to make sure you have a dough that is big enough to cover the pie and exceed a little bit again. Again, you want to exceed a little bit. Now this one was just recently rolled out, so it's possible to shrink just a little bit. However, in order to make it nice, you fold it in quarters first, or halves, and then in quarters. And then in order to make a nice design, you just cut like this. Just 2 ridges on each side. As well as you want to kind of cut the middle out. That gives it that breathing hole, because as the pie filling starts to cook inside of the pie, it will expand and expel steam. And that steam will actually pop off the pie crust if there is no way for that to be expelled. So it's very important that you have a little bit of a, what's called the chimney. We call it the chimney. So now you just lay your pie dough like this, straight across, flip it over, and as you see here, we have a really nice design, and we have our chimney right in the middle for the excess air to be expelled, and we're ready to go. Now, before I clean off the edges, I like to make it sure that it seals. In order to do that, I use the 2-thumb technique. What I do, I press down like this. And what this does, first of all, it creates a seal by pushing the 2 doughs together. At the same time, it also makes a nice design. As you can see, it goes pretty quick. And now we have the design. And now for us to finish up the pie before it's ready to go in the oven, again, you use your plastic scraper. If you do have to use a knife, it's very important that you use the back of the knife, like this. Okay, I prefer the plastic scraper though. So there we have our pie. Now in order for it to have a nice sheen, we're going to go ahead and give it a little bit of light egg wash. If you want a really, really shiny pie, you're better off to just give it a light coat to begin with, and then later on, before it's completely done, you give it another coat before it comes out of the oven. If you put too much egg wash on in the beginning, the pie will get dark before it's actually cooked all the way through. So it's very important you don't overwash it. The egg's going to take too much color because a pie takes between 45 minutes to an hour to bake properly. Okay? There is 3 different ways you can brush this. You can brush it with cream and just a basic heavy cream will actually also create a shine. It's called a milk wash. Milk itself, actually buttermilk works very well because of the fat particles that's in the buttermilk. It works very well also. Okay? So but here we have our double crusted pie. We have our crumb pie. To create my lattice work for the lattice pie, I have a piece of dough already rolled out here. And in order to create lattice work, you want to roll out the pie dough a little bit thicker than normally so you have a little bit more to work with. If you don't do that, it's kind of hard to work with when you pick it up and put it on the lattice. I like to use a beveled or a scalloped roller when I do this. It just gives a nice design. So I'm going to go ahead and use a ruler to make sure that my pieces are nice and even. So if you go like this, whoops. I'm going to go ahead and cut a couple extra. I may need some for the edge of the pie in order to make it look nice. So. Okay. So now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to put my lattice work together. Again, in order for the lattice to stick, it's very important that you egg wash the edge of the pie. Okay. I like to start in the middle. You kind of just attach it. And you want to have as much room in between these lattices as the lattice is wide in order to have a nice look. Okay, make sure it's nice and secure, press it in a little bit, then you start on the other way. I like to go a little bit so it's a little bit like a diamond shape lattice look. There we go. There we go. Now press it in very lightly. And then if it does not stick, make sure a little bit of egg wash makes it stick a little bit better. Okay. At this point, I want to make a nice border, and I'd use some more of the lattice I have here. Just make sure that it is egg washed again. Very lightly. You don't want it to slide around on you. Okay, and at this point we're going to go ahead and do the same thing as we did with the double crusted pie. We're going to go ahead and just use our thumb to create a little bit of a seal between the two pie doughs that we have created here. Okay. Again, using the plastic scraper. Now the excess dough that you have, you don't want to all work it, but this excess dough actually turn out to be very good for the bottom of the pies. The bottom of the pie should most of the time be mealy crust, and this, after we have worked it once, actually turns into a mealy crust. So do not discard the excess pie dough. You can always be used again, but if it is excess pie dough, it should always be used for the bottom of the crust. Okay. Now we egg wash our pie a little bit, also this one here. You got to be careful again, don't overwash it, don't go too much color. Very gently, try not to get any of the pie filling on your brush here. You can of course use a spray bottle for the egg wash, but this works very well the way it is. Okay, so now we have our 3 pies here. At this point here, it's important that we let the pie rest for about at least a half an hour to an hour, because we have just manipulated the dough, so we have activated the gluten again. Therefore, if we put it in the oven too early, it will start to shrink a little bit on us and they get a little bit out of proportion. So it's very important after you create your pie that you let it sit for about a half an hour to 45 minutes before you put it in the oven. When you put it in the oven, you want to have a hot oven, and if you don't have an oven with a bottom heat, if you have a regular kitchen oven like this one right here, it's important that you put a sheet pan in the oven so that you have something hot to put the pie on. This way the bottom of the pie seals faster, and therefore there will be no soggy crust in the bottom of this pie. Okay? So it's very important that we follow these steps. Now we have rested our pies for 45 minutes. Now we're ready to put them in the oven. I have a preheated oven at 420 degrees right here, and in the bottom of the oven I have put a sheet pan. Now the sheet pan is hot so that the bottom crust will heal. Before I put the pie in, I like to put a piece of parchment paper on the sheet pan so that if the pie do boil over a little bit, it will not boil over on the sheet pan and make a mess in the oven. So this way here we ensure that we may have a clean oven and clean baking. So here we put our pies in. Before I put my lattice work in here, I like to sprinkle a little bit of granulated sugar. I don't like to sprinkle the granulated sugar on there till it goes in the oven, and the reason for that is that if I put it in, let it sit and rest for 45 minutes, the granulated sugar, the egg wash, will make it melt. So I put it in just before I put it in the oven so it does not melt. If it melts, it will create caramelization and it will take color too early. Okay, our pies are now in the oven, and it will take between 35 and 45 minutes to bake these pies properly. Again, it's very important to have a hot oven and bottom heat in order to seal the bottom of the pie as soon as possible. It's about 45 minutes now. The pie should probably be ready. Let's take a look and see what they look like. Ooh, I believe they're done, so let's go ahead and take them out. See the nice colorization on the pies, and there you have your finished product. Okay. You see the lattice work, see a little bit of caramelization for the granulated sugar. The egg wash will give this a nice even color, and the streusel top also has a nice brown color. So here you have your 3 kinds of pies with 3 different crusts. Basic pie recipe right here.